El ordenador es tuyo. Y el paso que no eres de 5 horas. Well, good morning to everyone. Mr. Borrell, Josep Borrell, former High Representative of the European Union, dear Arab ambassadors, thank you so much for being here with us in Casa Árabe, distinguished guests and friends. It is an honor to host you all in Casa Árabe for this very timely and interesting roundtable in collaboration with our esteemed colleagues at the Elcano Royal Institute. Thank you, dear Charles, and to José Bericat for this very good initiative. At Casa Árabe, we've always believed in the power of dialogue, partnership, and critical thinking to navigate the most difficult issues. And today, more than ever, we need spaces like this one. Because the fact is that we are facing one of the most urgent and complex challenges of our time, the deepening crisis in the Middle East, and the biggest question mark of Europe's potential role in addressing it. The post-7 October scenario has paved the way to a huge reshuffle attempt in the Middle East. The terrible Israeli retaliation on Gaza and on the West Bank in the aftermath of the heinous terrorist Hamas attacks and the war in Lebanon, with the deep wound inflicted on Hezbollah, have been followed by the subsequent collapse of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria last December. All these hallmarks, indeed, denote the purpose of a total redesign of the region, an idea that has been floating in the air for the last few months. But following this logic, this transformational purpose could not be complete at all without addressing the Iranian nuclear and ballistic threat, along with its network of proxies. And so here we are now, shockingly alarmed by the big Israeli preemptive strike launched against Iran in the middle of a growing US implication of unpredictable consequences for the regional and global stability. This morning, we are fortunate to have with us Mr. Borrell, former EU High Representative, and the personality who know more in detail of the JCPOA and of the concerted international and EU frustrated but efforts to reach an agreement with the Iranian regime. It will be extremely interesting to listen to him on that first. First of all, on his view on the lost opportunity of a negotiated deal after the first Trump administration came into office. And secondly, and probably more to the point, of the current crisis. Is there still any chance of avoiding the worst case scenario of an overall war by returning to any possible negotiation or any solution in this sense? And in that case, is there any role for Europe in that? Europe cannot afford to stand by idly as a passive observer. The stakes are simply too high, and the human cost is too devastating. I do not pretend, though, that answers are simple, but I am convinced that the European Union has a historical responsibility and the moral imperative to act. But probably the next question could be, do we still have some real effective tools to try and play this desired constructive role? And if so, which ones are those? We have gathered several senior voices today who will tackle these issues with insight. After Mr. Borrell's introduction, two panels will follow. The first one with Ambassador Sven Kuhn von Bursdorf, former European Union representative in Palestine, and with Martin Konechny, Director of the European Middle East Project, who will join us online. Both will be moderated by José Bericat, Senior Researcher at the Royal Elcano Institute. The second session will present Mr. Munir Nusseibeh, Palestinian human rights lawyer and academic from Al-Quds University, and Sonia Bulos, Associate Professor of International Human Rights Law at Antonio de Nebrija University, both moderated by Karim Hauser, Coordinator of International Relations and Culture at Casa Árabe. Let me now please turn the floor to Charles Bauer, Director of Elcano Royal Institute, before hearing Mr. Borrell, and thank you again to you all for being here with us in Casa Árabe.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, dear friends. Thank you very much, Miguel, for having agreed to co-host this event at very short notice. And thank you all for your presence this morning. Thank you, José Bericat, as well, for having put this event together with our colleagues here in Casa Árabe. I'm going to be very brief because you're all here to listen to Josep. Muchas gracias, Josep, por acompañarnos esta mañana. I just wanted to express two ideas, basically. The first is that these tragic, brutal, horrible events that have been taking place in Palestine for many months now, more than months, in fact, are despicable and very worrisome in themselves, but they are also, I think, a turning point for us in the European Union. Many years ago, when I was at Oxford, I had a mentor called Ian Manners, and he described the European Union as a normative power. Those were the days when we Europeans irresponsibly thought that we would never live through major international conflicts again. We liked to think that we were living in a sort of postmodern world. We liked to believe that the European Union had been created precisely to turn its back on the use of force and to turn its back on antiquated notions of sovereignty and nationalism. And sadly, here we are. So the first issue for us as Europeans is, how are we going to respond to these challenges? Do we still hang on to this idea that we are a normative power? In other words, that what defines us is our ability to mold international norms at a time when many global actors don't seem to believe in those international norms that we regard as sacrosanct. So in a sense, this crisis is a mirror which is standing in front of us and which reflects a rather disturbing image, perhaps, of who we are, of our impotence, of our inability to perform our role as a relevant global actor. The second question that worries me most, and I think I've heard Josep Borrell mention this in our internal meetings very often, is that we are often accused in the so-called global south, which we in Elcano refer to as the plural south, because it's a very heterogeneous phenomenon. The plural south often regards us as two-faced. Countries in the global south or plural south often accuse us of double standards. We regard Ukraine as a horrible, brutal war which has to come to an end as soon as possible. We regard it as an existential threat. But our friends in the plural south often say, yes, but you've allowed more than 55,000 Palestinians, many of them women and children, innocent people, to be murdered, to be killed. And you've done nothing about it, despite your very close ties with Israel. And let us not forget that Israel, the EU is in fact Israel's closest economic partner. So these are some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. Our main concern at Elcano, I think, is to explore how the European Union as an organization, as an incredibly complex organization made up of 27 member states, which has a motto, by the way, united in diversity. It's becoming quite clear these days that this is an aspiration more than a reality. We are not really all that united in diversity, I'm afraid to say, and that obviously limits our ability to act as a global actor. Nevertheless, we are the largest trading bloc in the world. We are an internal market of 450 million people. We're not a military superpower, but we do spend more than 300 billion euros a year on defense, which isn't insignificant. And the time perhaps has come for us to decide what kind of global actor we want to be. Are we simply going to remain on the sidelines and allow these atrocities to continue, or are we going to wake up, smell the coffee, and more importantly, get out of bed? So thank you very much for having convened this event. It's wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues here, and I'm sure this is going to be a fascinating day. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning to everybody. Thank you to Casa Árabe for hosting us. I'm very happy to participate in this event in my quality of a distinguished fellow of the Elcano Institute. I am very proud of this nomination that allows me to continue working on many issues, many fields of the external relations with the umbrella of Elcano. Thank you, Charles. And thank you for inviting me to participate. Well, in fact, it's more than invitation. I feel part of this initiative. First, because I've been talking a lot with the people who has been organizing it. And secondly, because I am very happy to see here with us the man who was our ambassador in the Palestinian territories during my mandate. And he did a remarkable work on trying to defend the Palestinians in front of the attacks at that time, much less dangerous than today from the Israeli army. Some weeks ago or some days ago, everybody was focusing on Gaza. And suddenly it is Iran who attracts the attention of the world. And now it's an open war between Iran and Israel. And Gaza, it has been more people being killed in Gaza during this last week than all casualties in Iran and Israel together. So the massacre in Gaza continues, but the focus has changed. And now people don't count anymore how many atrocities are taking place in Gaza. They look at what will be the result of this war, which certainly is a big challenge for the world stability and for the regional stability. Netanyahu has been justifying this attack as a preventive attack in order to avoid Iran to become a nuclear power, and with the narrative that the threat for Israel was imminent, and it was more or less that the bomb was going to fall, the atomic bomb was going to fall in Tel Aviv. Well, that's not true. Let's say that that's not true. Even the CIA on the Trump administration is saying that's not true. Iran has not the bomb, and it's far away of having the bomb. Well, it may have the bomb, yes, maybe, but not tomorrow. And I want to remember that in 1967, de Gaulle condemned Israel by launching a preventive attack and creating the war. It was a preventive attack also, overnight, destroying the forces of the Egyptians and Arab countries. And de Gaulle was very clear that this is a preventive attack. It's against international law. You cannot launch a war just because you believe that the other will launch it. And which is the real purpose of this war? From my understanding, is there are two reasons. One is a structural one. Netanyahu has been saying for years and years that Iran is a nuclear danger and Israel has to attack Iran. I've been listening to this narrative for years and years and trying to push the US to do that because he believed that alone was not able to do it. The conjunctural one is to try to sabotage the negotiations between Iran and US about to revive the nuclear deal. Why not to wait 2 or 3 days in order to see how this negotiation was going to go? They were going to meet yesterday, and the day before the meeting, he launches the attack. It's clear he was afraid of the possibility that Trump could make another deal with Iran, which would be more or less the same deal that Obama forged, but just changing the name. It's no longer the Obama deal, but the Trump deal. And that's enough to satisfy the ego. But the substance could not be very different. In the last 5 years, I've been in charge of trying to manage this deal and to try to make it to revive when Trump broke it without any reason. Thanks to this deal, Iran is not a nuclear power. We prevented the development of the Iran nuclear project, thanks to the deal that Obama made together with us, with the European Union. And then Trump came and destroyed it because he didn't like an Obama success. Oh, this is an awful deal. And he broke it. We have been trying, I've been trying with the support of my people, with Enrique Costa, my political director, and all the diplomats of the European Union, trying to make it to to be again a deal that makes Iran not a nuclear power. This is the reason, I think, for launching an attack that certainly jeopardizes the possibility of this deal reaching a good end. And now we are going to go to what can be considered as an attempt of regime change and have a look at the regime change that we have been trying to make in the past. Have a look at Iraq and have a look at Libya. These were regime changes attempts. And look at the results. It's not so easy to produce a regime change by bombing, terrifying the population, destroying a country, and making another one which is imposed from a foreign power. That's what President Macron said from Canada. President Macron said, what Israel is doing is a strategic error. It's a strategic error because regime change cannot be made this way. Good. Immediately, Trump answered saying, President Macron is always wrong. Well, maybe it's not always wrong, but he cannot say this thing and at the same time to be part of a statement produced by several European members, including the United Kingdom, saying that they support Israel because Israel is acting on the framework of international law. Come on. The Europeans, we are accumulating contradictions over contradictions. We consider that this attack is done in accordance with international law. Really? Do they really believe it? It seems it's not. It's not in accordance with international law. It's done because someone is stronger enough in order to do it. But it's a violation, a clear violation of the international law. And certainly, I am not a fan of the Ayatollah regime. But if every time that someone is not fan of the regime of the neighbor can act by bombing it, in which kind of a world are we going to be? So this is something which is against international law. The position of the Europeans is absolutely contradictory. And once again, Europeans said, we support Israel in the framework of the respect of the international law. But they have never asked themselves the critical question. Do Israel respect international law on their war? We respect the right to defend in the framework of international law. Good. Now comes the relevant question. Does Israel respect international law? They don't want to answer this question. It has to be respected. Okay, it has to be respected. Do they respect it? Silence. They don't want to put this question. And this is the relevant question. I support you as much and as long as you behave in a certain manner. Okay, do you behave in this manner? We don't know. But we support you. Well, this schizophrenic process has to come to an end. 15 months ago, President Sanchez and the Prime Minister of Ireland went to the Commission and to me as High Representative saying, please, can you check if Israel is fulfilling international law according with their obligations coming from the association with Europe? Can you do it, please? Silence. Silence. The President of the Commission didn't answer the request of two members. At the end of my term, I went to the Council and I asked to the Council, presenting a report done by the Special Envoy for Human Rights. But this report was crystal clear, and many other reports presented by different organizations explaining what's going on Gaza and in the West Bank. Don't forget the West Bank. And asked the Council to do what I could propose on the framework of my competences to stop the political dialogue with Israel. because it is only that what the High Representative have proposed. And the Council didn't support my proposal. It was not even discussed. 15 months later, and 30,000 people killed later, don't count only the time, count also the casualties. 15 months later, and 30,000 people being killed more, because when President Sanchez asked for this, there were 25 people being killed in Gaza. Now there are 55,000. In 15 months, 30,000 people more. 30,000 people more has been the requested leverage for not 3, but 17 members asking to the Commission, please, can you do at least have a glance, have a look, tell us if the international law is being respected or not. And also to the services of the High Representative. I don't know how long has passed since then. It seems that 4 weeks, oh my God, 4 weeks. 4 weeks to distinguish the day of the night. 4 weeks thinking deeply, studying deeply, to decide, not to decide, to make a proposal. Let's see what is the proposal. But 4 weeks, understand, 4 weeks. All the reports were on the table, all the substance, all the matters, all the required information were on the table since last November. Okay, 4 more weeks. How many people has been killed in these 4 weeks? On the last weeks, more people being killed in Gaza than in Israel and Iran together. Well, let's see what's coming. Let's see what's happening. But in any case, what is going on in Gaza will be a handicap in the conscience of the world, of the Europeans, and of the Israeli people. It's not going to be forgotten. But at least let's make a stop. But who can stop it? Only the ones who provide the ammunition. If you kill people with bombs, 90% of the bombs being supplied by the US and the Europeans, the only one who can stop the carnage, the massacre, is the one who provides the tools in order to make it a fact. So when I am listing European leaders, as my dear President of the European Commission saying, oh, this is intolerable. This is intolerable? Okay, if it is intolerable, don't tolerate it. Don't tolerate what you say it's intolerable. Otherwise, you look cynical. And people are perfectly aware of this contradiction, that once and again, we continue saying the same mantra. We respect the right to defense because it has to be done in the framework of the international law. It's becoming tragic. And someone is paying for this tragedy. So let's hope that in the next weeks, days, the European Union will do something, because they could do a lot of things. I am sure you here in this panel, you will present some proposals. Even Financial Times, which is certainly not the newspaper of Hamas, no? As far as I know, Financial Times is not the newspaper of Hamas. Okay, read the Financial Times proposal saying this should be done by the ones who has the capacity to stop it. So let's see what's going to happen. But in the meantime, let's try with our capacities, which are very small, but at least let's use it to discuss, to raise the voices, and to try to prevent a complete destabilization of the Middle East. Because it's clear, Israel wants to become the big regional power, the supremacy on the Middle East, the only power in town. And I suppose the people in the region should be a little bit afraid of that. Now, let's see what's going to happen in Iran, but it has been also Syria, it has been also Lebanon. The equilibrium, the stability of the Middle East is completely jeopardized. And I think that Netanyahu is clearly willing to make the world focus to shift from Gaza to another bigger war, a more geopolitical war, geostrategic war, because at the end, Gaza is not being considered a geopolitical issue. But an open war with Iran that could involve others, then it becomes some geopolitical matter that matters because it affects the stability of the region. So thank you to all of you for being here to discuss openly, to put on the table proposals, not rhetorical accusations, but things that can be done, justified by facts. And I will stay here with you as long as I can. I'll happily have a plane to take in some minutes, and I will have to leave before the meeting comes to an end. But thank you to Elcano, thank you to Casa Árabe, and thank you in particular to the people who knows what's going on, because you have been there and you have been witnessing it. And thank you to all of you to spread the concern and the need to act about this tragedy. Thank you.
Yo creo que ahora pasan ellos, o sea, que mejor, entonces, siéntate delante, y tú te dejas pasar, pero consigue no para ayudar. ¿Me siento aquí o aquí? ¿Le parece estar ahí en medio? Sí. ¿Director? Tiene el momento de micrófono. And this is the microphone. You get on here. I need some of the. Let's see that works. Not as blurred. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. Sound on? Yes. Yes. Great. Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, my name is Jose Vegas. I'm a senior fellow. I think it's very timely. Thank you also to Sven Kuhn von Verstorff, retired ambassador of the EU, for being here with us today, and also to Martin Konechny, who's joining us online, hopefully, if there are no glitches, from Brussels. Martin Konechny is the director of the European Middle East Project and one of the foremost experts on relations between the EU bloc and Israel, Palestine. Well, just a short introduction before handing over to Sven. What brings us together is this catastrophic situation in the Middle East. After the horrific and heinous attacks of the 7th of October 2023 against Israel, in which 1,200 people were killed by Palestinian militants and 230 were taken hostage, Israel launched one of the most intensive bombing campaigns in history against the Gaza Strip. It's the most complete destruction of a territory in history in modern warfare. Gaza has been erased. The Ministry of Health of Gaza talks about 55,000 killed, but really estimates are real estimates by experts are much, much higher. The Economist released a couple of weeks ago estimates ranging from the most moderate being 77,000 up to almost 110,000 Palestinians killed, massacred in the Gaza Strip and counting. Indeed, other estimates are
3 or 4 times higher. It continues while international attention has been diverted to the war Israel launched last Friday against Iran. In the last 24 hours, indeed, more than 100 Palestinians, starving Palestinians, were killed while trying to obtain aid in the latest massacre. Israel is indeed launching a multi-fronted war. It is ongoing offensive not only with Iran, but also with Syria, with Lebanon, every day incursions, attacks, arrests, destruction. Israel has been, an investigation has been opened by the International Court of Justice for genocide, and there is a broad consensus among experts that indeed Israel is committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. Israel has pioneered a new form of warfare, AI-powered warfare of unrestrained brutality, in the words of one recent expert. The laws of war seem to have been cast aside. The justification is the algorithm. Israel launched a war against Iran just as pressure was mounting from Western powers. Indeed, we timed this event to coincide with a UN high-level panel that was sponsored by France and Saudi Arabia that would have taken place these very days, in which a major push, not only recognition of Palestine by a host of countries was being projected, but also a peace plan, an international peace plan to resolve the conflict. This sadly has been cancelled or at least postponed due to the war between Israel and Iran. At the same time, this review, as Mr. Borrell mentioned, of the association agreement continues, and we expect the results by the end of this month. We'll be hearing more on this by Martin Konechny, who really has his finger on the pulse. Israel has, of course, legitimate security concerns, but this response has been disproportionate and has led to this catastrophic situation in the Middle East. What has led to this disproportionate use of violence by Israel? Impunity, constant impunity. The European Union has tried for years, if not decades, dialogue, political dialogue without consequences. As the Financial Times article pointed out 2 weeks ago, the only thing that will really stop this catastrophe is action, sanctions against Israel, taking real positive measures. No more dialogue without consequences. Israel, however, with this war, has forced the alignment of Western powers while further destabilizing the whole region. Israel is emerging, as Mr. Borrell said, as the unrivaled hegemon in the region, and this will create not more stability, but further imbalance and further instability. With no further ado, we're here really to discuss Ambassador Koen van Versto's proposals for measures, concrete measures that the EU can take in order to really try and stop this catastrophe and for EU to become a real engaged actor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Investor Moro, Director Powell, thank you very much for this invitation, this opportunity. Dear Josep Borrell, my former boss and now spiritual leader, I congratulate you on your leadership during your mandate, and you seem to be very much on the verge of being ahead of the curve again on that matter. It's a great honor for me to be here with you, and I don't pretend to have the answers to these very challenging questions, nor do I think I have the possibility of guiding EU policy, but I think when I looked at it from my experience of nearly 4 years as the EU head of mission in Palestine and the 2 years ever since the catastrophe unfolded before our eyes in Gaza and the West Bank, in dramatic things, that actually there are things the EU and member states, and I make this distinction, member states can actually do. So that is not why we are utterly despaired and frustrated by what we see on the ground through social media. Unfortunately, there's no foreign journalist on the ground in Gaza. We all get it through Gazans who are, with the risk of their life, taking pictures and reporting what's in. While we all are utterly despaired, I still think there is hope, not for optimism, hope for something which might impact dramatically on the moral conscience of mankind. And that may put pressure on political decision makers to act accordingly. Politicians, and Borrell knows it much better than anyone else, act when there is political cost involved. So the political cost involved, politicians will act. We need public pressure, think tanks, religious foundations, media, journalists, civil society groups. They impact on decision makings. And that's the reason why I'm so grateful, Ambassador Moro, Director Powell, to be here with you to try to disseminate and discuss with you these things. So what are the concrete things I think we can do? The first is that actually we have to pursue the course the former High Rep Josep Borrell chartered by engaging much more strongly with the Arab community. It is actually the revival of the Arab Peace Initiative, which was sponsored and launched by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 2002. It has been dormant for the past 20 years, really, and it was revived in the last year in the margins of a UN General Assembly meeting, and thanks to leadership from the EAS concretely, and the Saudis and the League of Arab States, supported by Jordan and Egypt, this became a new policy framework. But of course, so far, this global alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution needs to be put into practice. Concrete measures need to be discussed. All the final state issues need to be sorted out and discussed. And also the measures in terms of coercion needs to be discussed, and this hasn't taken place yet. That's the reason why it was important that President Macron and Mohammed bin Salman decided to co-host this conference in New York, which was postponed. Got that as an opportunity to further flesh out what can be done. The day after Gaza is also a day towards a two-state solution. Let's not forget, and you said this, that the West Bank is subject to a de facto annexation on a daily basis. I have been witnessing this for 4 years on the ground, but it's taking incredibly speed right now. So both Gaza and the West Bank need to be very much looked at when we want to salvage the two-state solution as the future prospect for self-determination of the Palestinian people. So that is very important. And the Gulf, as I said, and the Arab neighbors need to be fully involved. It needs to be fleshed out, and I wish that more member states like France, like Spain, can put their weight behind that. The EU bodies will only act as their critical mass of EU members that I come to at a later point in our discussion, but it's important that we continue on that one. Also, the matter of state recognition. 75% of the UN members have already recognized the state of Palestine, 149 states as we speak, I think, hoping that more. If you look at a map in colors, and look at who of the world recognized Palestine, you see basically only the OECD countries are the only ones who have not recognized Palestine yet. The rest of the world, the global south, all Muslim majority countries have done so. So the EU and the member states are laggards in that one. And it's very important to create a diplomatic level field with a view to ensuring that the Palestinians are being taken seriously. If there is in this highly asymmetric conflict we have seen for the past 75 years between Israel, the supreme power, and the Palestinian people with hardly any power, if there is no diplomatic level playing field, how can you assume, how can you imagine that Israel takes the other party seriously? And that's the reason why recognition of Palestine is very important. I come to it later when we talk about what on the Palestinian side needs to be done. The second very important angle of attack, if I may say, for the EU and its member states is to protect international law and the UN institutions. So let me go through various angles here. The most prominent and the most recent one were the provisional orders of the International Court of Justice in January, March, and May 2025, actually accepting the accusation of South Africa and other countries that there is a plausibility, and I say this ad verbatim, plausibility of genocide and that is recognized. There is no genocide recognized because the decision on whether genocide has taken place, it will be matter of a later judgment. But for the time being, there were provisional orders instructed by the ICJ towards Israel, for instance, prevent any kind of acts which could enhance or be considered genocide, prevent and punish incitement, allow humanitarian access, provide and respect and protect forensic evidence, and report on a monthly basis on the implementation of these measures. None of this has been taken by Israel. And these were instructions under international law obligatory. And then there were indirect obligations, third-party obligations to the UN members. And there were 3 of them, as a matter of fact, according to the Genocide Convention. And the EU as a body is not party to it, but is responsible to uphold these obligations of the member states. One is to prevent genocide, to be non-complicit, and to review policies which could incur or enhance the risk of allowing genocidal acts on the ground. And this latter aspect concerns arms sales, political cover and support, diplomatic support. So there are indirect obligations, not directly addressed towards the UN membership, but indirect obligations under the Genocide Convention, which the international community has to follow. It's not optional. Then there is this very important opinion, advisory opinion of July 2024 by the ICJ. It's a landmark decision. It's advisory, but actually it reiterates preemptory laws and customary laws of international law. What does it say? For the first time, it says that the occupation is unlawful and that the occupation has to end. And there are clearly spelled out third-party obligations to end it. Oh, sorry. No. Get a magnet here.
Okay. Can you hold this?
I will.
Instead, I'll bring you out.
Oh, I can use this one if you just
use this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Don't worry.
So I'm going to come here and so these obligations, third-party obligations, in the follow-up of the ICJ advisory opinion, concern a number of acts. And it's actually not undertaking acts which could prolong the unlawful occupation of Palestinian territory. Review assistance with a view to ensuring that none of the aid or assistance supports the prolongation of the occupation. Review the policies of the EU towards Israel and distinguish between Israel proper and the illegal settlements. And ensure that your policy, political, commercial, diplomatic, in any way, this differentiates and distinguishes between what Israel is doing and what you are doing with the settlements, the illegal settlements. We come to it later, and Martin Konechny, who is there, will certainly talk about this as well. Very importantly, this also concerns the provision of arms. Germany, my country, supplies 1/3 of the arms to Israel, 2/3 basically come from the US. Italy provides a little bit, UK provides a little bit, but these are the 2 major suppliers. It's absolutely essential that you have to, under the ICJ legal opinion, you have to ensure that none of the arms European Union member states provide to Israel can be used for the prolongation of the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory or for possibly, plausibly, genocidal acts in Gaza. It's very important. If there is the slightest risk, they are, under German and European international law, they should stop it. None of this has actually taken place. There's a discussion in the UK because there are ingredients, elements of the F-35 bombers which come from the UK. And there's a strong discussion. I've tried to stop this. But again, this is a matter where we have to act as a group and individual countries. And then, of course, a third aspect to protecting the UN is ensuring that the UN institutions, notably UNRWA,
WFP, UNICEF, and WHO, I assume you know the abbreviations here, actually can do their work. It's unacceptable that the humanitarian foundations, what a word, actually acting with the consent of the Israel military and the American military in Gaza, killing on a daily basis, probably as we speak here, Palestinians trying to have access to food, that this is substituting what the international community has established to provide as humanitarian aid for people in need. And the EU has to act on this one. And we have obligation under international law and even European law to do that. The last point, which is also contentious, are the obligations towards the International Criminal Court, the ICC. It was a blatant disregard, a blatant violation by Prime Minister Orban to have received Mr. Netanyahu, who was actually as under arrest warrant. And it's equally a violation, if not of the spirit or the letter, by Chancellor Merz, who, when he was on the campaign trail, invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to Berlin. This is unacceptable. It's also unacceptable what the Chancellor said 2 days ago about Israel is doing the dirty job for us to clean up Iran. Unacceptable under international law, under diplomatic decency, and he's strongly criticized by his own coalition partner for that, and even within his own party. But it shows you what you said, Charles, about how weak EU and member states have become in terms of defending the normative order which we have established after the Second World War. If we are singing to the tune of authoritarian leaders, of dictators, we're singing to the tune of megalomaniac leaders in the US, we are completely disregarding the very foundation upon which not only Germany, but the EU has been built. The DNA of Europe is adherence to international law. Without that, we would not be here. Our mantra, never war again, was built on the premise that the only solution to ending the cycle of war is peace, democracy, respect of human rights. What we're doing right now is providing a graveyard, digging a graveyard for that. But I mean, you said this already, so there's no need to elaborate on that. The third important aspect is, in terms of what Europe can do, is leveraging Europe's economic and diplomatic clout. Again, we have obligations under the ICJ advisory opinion to act upon it under the EU-Israel Association Agreement. I spare you what we all can do. But one possibility is, and if you want to imagine what could be done, just look at what we have been doing in record time with Russia. 17 packets of sanctions, the farthest reaching sanctions ever contemplated and ever implemented by the EU. So it is possible. Even if you have people like Mr. Orban or Mr. Fico in Slovakia objecting, we have possibilities of doing these things if there is political will and determination. Now, what can be done? On the 23rd of June, we're having the Association Council. Of course, we can suspend the entire agreement if the EU leaders come to the conclusion that the Article 2 the human rights clause has been violated. Olaf Skog, your special envoy for human rights, has a very clearly established report, which was leaked recently, as a matter of fact. I mean, you don't need to spend weeks and weeks to analyze this, or any UN report, and you don't even need to go to Francesca Albanese's report. Any UN report is crystal clear about that. Israel is in permanent and constant and strong violation of its human rights obligations towards its partners, towards the international community. So one way would be suspension. However, since we need for suspension unanimity, all 27 members need to do that, one could probably go for lesser ambitious goals. For instance, one could cancel the Horizon Europe project, which is a very important multi-billion euro program where Israel is a primary beneficiary. It's actually academic and think tank and scientific cooperation. Even Erasmus, these are things which can be decided upon by 2/3 majority. They are part of the commercial agreement, and as such can be acted upon through qualified majority voting. That means 55% of the 27 member states, representing 65% of the population of 450 million. These two numbers together allow a decision to go through on a matter pertaining to commercial policy. If the matter is a political matter which concerns sanctions, so a CFSP matter, then you need, by definition, unanimity. If you don't have a unanimous decision, either by the heads of state of the European Council or the ministers, which Josep Borrell led for 5 years, if you don't have that, as a precursory development, you cannot act upon qualified majority for implementing it. That's the caveat we have in the EU. There are flexibility mechanisms, but you need political will, both by the European Union leaders and the member states, to be willing to actually give away a part of their sovereign prerogatives as the individual state, not to block decisions. We have possibilities in the Lisbon Treaty, and we can discuss it, but that is one of the reasons why it's so difficult. Now, Martin will certainly talk about it, but the differentiation policy has been implemented very badly. There is a labeling requirement. The EU Department of Trade, following up on a European Court of Justice order of 2019, instructed all producers in Israel of saying where the product comes from, the wine or the fruits. Do they come from Israel or from settlements? But we have no mechanism to monitor this. We also have no mechanism, for instance, to verify whether there are indirect subsidies from Israel through banks, enterprises, institutions supporting settlement producers. We don't have it. Right now, according to estimates, about 300 million euros worth of goods come from settlements. But we have no statistical evidence, which is 15 times more than what the Palestinians from the occupied territory export to the EU. Just to give you the idea. Our trade with Israel as the EU is in the vicinity, imports and exports together, of 70 billion euros. Yeah, 70 billion exports and imports. And then the trade, the services is about another 30 billion. So we have a huge leverage if we want to make it impactful. We're the most important trading partners, as Charles said, but we need to act. So that is very important. I think we can do something, but it has to be done with far more impetus. I also don't want to just pass over the issue of conditionality towards the Palestinian leadership. Israel is the main culprit, there is no doubt, in terms of prolonging an illegal occupation, but also for discussing the day after, we need to address the power vacuum, not only in Gaza, but also dysfunctional leadership, which we have in Ramallah. The last elections took place in 2006, won by Hamas, by the way. The 2005 presidentials brought Mr. Abbas in power. For 20 years, we don't have a democratically elected government in Palestine. And that creates a huge disincentive for young people, notably, who never voted for the leadership currently there, neither for Hamas nor for Fatah, to stay engaged. If you want to create a power which is legitimate, recognized, effectful, you need to have an electoral process which gives that credibility from the electorate to the people. Now, right now, with the war and the carnage going in Gaza, you cannot imagine that. But according to plans we have seen from Palestinians, 1 or 2 years from now, subject to ending the war in Gaza, it is possible, and subject to providing in the interim a unified Palestinian technocratic governance. And the EU could help building it by conditioning its aid, its diplomatic support to political reforms along that line. So it's just not Israel which we can actually, impact on if we get our act together. It's also the Palestinian leadership. There is no example in the world where you can impose a government from the outside. It has to grow from within. So unified, legitimate leadership in Palestine is a conditio sine qua non for the day after in Gaza and the West Bank. So last thing, forge coalitions of the willing. We've seen the problems with unanimity because of our construction errors in the Lisbon Treaty. If it is impossible to act in good order and time and with determination and focus, we need to look at member states. And please, I want to end with a note of hope here. You can see that your government in Spain took the lead in recognizing the state of Palestine a couple of weeks ago, 2 months ago, with Slovenia, Ireland, and Norway together. By the way, it was Norway. It's not an EU member state. So it's possible to work in tandem with other states outside the EU structures. It is possible, but you need to move ahead. And countries with political clout and economic firepower can do so. Right now, the discussions towards ending the war of Russia against Ukraine is taking place by 3 major powers: the UK, France, and Germany. There is no EU there because we can't agree on certain measures because of our laggards, Hungary and Slovakia and others. So that's very important right now, that we need to look at building blocks where European Union member states as a group can move ahead. If it is impossible to use the flexibility mechanisms under the Lisbon Treaty and get everybody on board, that will create momentum in order to be impactful on the ground. So let me finish with one thing. For that to happen, politicians need to be held to account. Your Spanish Prime Minister, the German Chancellor, the British Prime Minister, the French President, the Italian President, a Prime Minister in this case. And this comes from civil society, from think tanks, from media, from public voices. Without that pressure, they will not move. If there is a political cost, they might move. And don't wait for Mr. Trump to give you the signal to move ahead. It has to come from our countries. And that's the reason why I'm so grateful for being able to talk to you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sven. Very well heard. I'd like to turn to now Martin Konechny, who runs the European Middle East project. Martin is very busy on this file, and we wish that he was here with us today instead of online. He was actually presenting today a very important report that I believe on this very matter that will be discussed at the European Parliament. Martin, thank you so much for being with us today. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jose. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm sorry not to be able to be with you in person, but greetings from Belgium. I hope you hear me well through this connection. And it's an honor to be able to speak after the 2 distinguished speakers. I think they covered much of the ground that I was planning to cover. So what I will do is that I will maybe add on to some more elements in addition to what both of them, both Mr. Borrell and Sven Bergsdorf were mentioning. So let me maybe start with where we are right now in the EU. As has been mentioned, there will be an important meeting of EU foreign ministers on Monday, the 23rd of June, where the ongoing review of Israel's compliance with Article 2 of the Association Agreement will be presented and discussed. And there should also be a discussion on the next steps. The review is expected to conclude that Israel is in breach of Article 2, which is the human rights clause, the essential element of the association agreement. But we have to still see how exactly this will be formulated. This will not be public, but there will have to be public communication around it. But then maybe the more important question is what kind of options for next steps will be on the table? And the most important question is how much political support will there be for actually taking any steps? Maybe let me link to what Sven ended with, a bit of optimism and also the message that in order for member states, for governments to move, they need to feel public pressure. And I think that's exactly correct. And to an extent, we have seen it already. The review itself is a product of such a shift, which took place, I would say, in the month of May, when I think how we can describe it is that the middle ground of the EU political spectrum has shifted. As Mr. Borrell explained 1 year ago, or more than 1 year ago, when Spain and Ireland came up with a proposal to put the association agreement on the table and review compliance with Article 2, there was very little support. Maybe Belgium, maybe Slovenia, but not much more beyond that. So only that flank of governments who are, let's say, most concerned about the plight of the Palestinians have responded to it. And only 1 year later, when the death toll has more than doubled, the middle ground of the EU shifted, led by the Netherlands, which is a country with a center-right and even far-right government, which is quite strongly committed to Israel. And yet, the severity of the situation in Gaza in particular has reached such intensity that it crossed a certain threshold, which has existed in this middle ground of the EU. I'm talking also about countries like, or governments such as Sweden, the current right-wing government in Sweden, Finland, and even countries like Austria, surprisingly, actually supported the review. So this was a shift, and it went beyond what almost any observers expected. Even just at the beginning of the meeting of the foreign ministers 1 month ago, eventually 17 countries supported the review. But now it's just a review. And the question is, will it translate into any action? And that's the question which we will face, or which the EU foreign ministers will face on Monday. Let me now maybe just add to what might be on the table. Sven mentioned a couple of the options. The association agreement, he said rightly that it can only be suspended by unanimity. However, as Sven also explained, parts of the agreement can be suspended through qualified majority. And I think the most significant one that people should be focusing their attention to is the trade part of the association agreement, which is the part that allows preferential trade between the EU and Israel. And that is the key source of EU's leverage, because we are Israel's largest trading partner. So if the EU wants to be serious and apply its leverage and actually really put pressure on Israel, this would be the option to use on the basis of qualified majority. What are some of the other options that might be on the table on Monday? As again, Sven mentioned, the possibility of suspending Israel's participation in Horizon Europe, which is this extensive program for research cooperation where Israel is very strongly participating, including some quite controversial projects that have involved Israeli ministries of defense and national security and Israeli defense companies, although it can only be used for civil purposes, but nobody can control how these projects are ultimately used and where this technology ultimately leads to. Another option that could be on the table is banning trade with settlements, which is something slightly different because the settlements are actually not covered by the association agreement, precisely because the association agreement applies only to Israel, and settlements are outside of Israel's internationally recognized territory. So they are not covered by the association agreement, but still in this context, this idea of banning settlement trade could be put on the table. There are two ways to do it. One is to do it as a sanction, as a CFSP measure, where again you need unanimity, which isn't going to happen because of countries like Hungary and the Czech Republic. But there is also a route to adopt this as a trade measure by the European Commission, which would not be aimed as a sanction, but more as a way to regulate and protect trade with the occupied Palestinian territory, basically to stipulate that for imports of products from the territory, the products need to have certificates of origin from the Palestinian Authority, which would be modeled on an arrangement we already have for Cyprus. Another option that might be on the table is related to visa. At the moment, all Israelis, including settlers, have visa-free access to the Schengen zone, whereas Palestinians who live in the same territory with the settlers under occupation and are considered protected people under the Geneva Convention, these Palestinians do not have visa-free access. They must apply for visa. So in this way, the EU's visa policy is kind of mirroring and reinforcing the existing discriminatory regime which exists in the West Bank. And there are precedents from Russia and Ukraine where the EU has stipulated rules regarding applications for visa for persons from the Russian-occupied and annexed parts of Ukraine, including non-recognition of passports. So we do not recognize Russian passports issued in or for people in these occupied territories. So that policy goes much further even than what I've just been talking about as an option. Finally, we can expect that the idea of sanctions will be on the table, sanctions on maybe individual ministers, which is what the UK and Canada and several other countries adopted last week for the first time, sanctioning Israeli ministers. Sweden has called for this, some other countries as well. However, sanctions require unanimity. And so I question why countries like Sweden propose this as the main option, knowing that it's politically almost impossible to have these sanctions adopted. And so from a political perspective, although it would be very much justified in principle, but from a political perspective, this might be a dead end. And it would be more advisable to focus on some of the trade measures that can be adopted through qualified majority. Now, am I hopeful that any of these measures will be taken? It's really hard to say. Again, at the foreign ministers meeting last month, nobody expected that so many member states would support the review. And there was a real sense of a shift. But now the dynamics have shifted, also with the Israel-Iran war. And it is very hard to predict where the discussion will go on Monday. I could absolutely imagine that there will be no agreement to do anything. And I think this would be another major blow to the EU's credibility after the expectations have been raised so much through this process. And it would be a signal emboldening the Israeli government to continue and expand its course in Gaza. What might happen is that the ministers will somehow try to defer the decision. You know, we have these options and we will continue to study them and we will come back to them in July. And in that way, maybe to put a sort of a credible threat on the table for Israel. If it doesn't reverse course, let's say within a month, then we will really take some of these actions. So it is to be seen. But again, the Israeli attack on Iran, and I don't say it was its motivation, but definitely it's one of its side benefits has been to undermine international diplomacy, aiming to provide a measure of accountability for Israeli actions. We saw that with the conference at the UN, which was postponed. And it's having a similar kind of effect on the EU dynamics. Now, I want to stress that in principle, and if the political leaders were responsible, it should have the opposite effect. It should be adding the sense of urgency that pressure needs to be put on Israel and that Israel needs to be constrained should be even higher after its attack on Iran, which manifestly violates the UN Charter and is undermining really the core foundations of the international order built after World War II. And I would like to remind that the association agreement, in addition to the human rights clause, which is well known, also has a reference to the respect for the UN Charter in its preamble. So it should be actually reinforcing the EU sense that we need to constrain this extremist course by the Israeli government, both in the occupied territories and in the wider region. But in practice, it is counteracting each other because, as Mr. Borrell said, many EU leaders, after the Israeli attack, jumped basically in defense of Israel. And we see rhetoric that I don't think we have ever seen before, the degree of a reversal of the reality, basically painting what is white as black and what is black and white. We should contrast this with the response of much of Europe in 2003 to the US invasion in Iraq, when at least, I would say, majority of the EU was very critical. And now we have some of the same countries, including France and Germany, which basically line up to a large extent behind this action vis-a-vis Iran. Yes, they also call for de-escalation and they call for diplomacy. But once they said that they defend Israel's or support or acknowledge Israel's right to defend itself, that's not de-escalation. That's the exact opposite. That's giving legitimacy to these Israeli actions and emboldening them further. And I'd like to highlight that even in contrast with the situation in 2003, we now actually, and Mr. Borrell said it, we had an ongoing diplomatic process, which was aimed at constraining and stopping the Israeli the Iranian nuclear project. Plus, we have a situation where the public opinion is probably as critical of Israel as it has ever been. And yet, most of the European leaders, or I would say the key European leaders from the largest countries, have so far taken this astonishing stance with regard to Iran. One more thing, we should bear in mind that Israel's sense of triumph over Iran is likely to have a knock-on effect in its actions in the occupied territories. It is likely to even further increase determination to go towards full ethnic cleansing of Gaza and then potentially the West Bank, because it reinforces a sense of impunity and sense of total unchecked power. It is, I'd say, very logical and not surprising. What I think is surprising are the reactions of the international community, especially Europe, which should be not only because of principles and commitments to international law, but simply because of its narrow interests in regional stability and in preventing migration, the number one political concern in the EU, especially on the political right. Where do these governments think that Palestinians, if they are really pushed out from Gaza and maybe also from the West Bank, where do they think that these people will end up and try to seek refuge? I'd like to maybe mention two specific points quickly, if you allow me, just to flag. One is what Jose mentioned. There is an important study that has been issued just this morning. You can find a link in the Politico newsletter, Politico Europe. And it is a study on the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. Sven spoke about it, the one issued in July last year on the occupation, on the illegality of the Israeli occupation. So two professors of international and EU law, leading professors, I would say, produced a study detailing the implications of this opinion of the Court of Justice for EU and member state policies. And it's a first study of such kind. It was commissioned by 5 members of the European Parliament from different countries and from different political groups. And it goes to quite a lot of detail on actually many of the measures that we have discussed here. when it comes to potential ban on settlement trade, dealing with visa, the association agreement. So it very much ties into the current discussion about the review and about the association agreement. I'd like to highlight that this is only based on legal considerations, not political considerations, and it is only based on the advisory opinion of the ICJ. So the situation, the current situation in Gaza is not even included as a factor, and that obviously comes on top and should add urgency. One important point that is in the study with regard to trade with settlements, Sven talked about the existing measures of labeling and how they do not work effectively in practice. That's true, but the study makes a very clear point. These existing measures that the EU has were not designed to prevent trade dealings with settlements, which is what the court requires. It asks explicitly all states to prevent trade dealings which contribute to the occupation. So yes, labeling, etc., is not effective, but it has not even been designed to prevent trade. It has been designed actually to continue this trade. So I think this shows that there is a legal obligation on the EU to change these policies and adopt a more restrictive approach, which could involve a full ban. Several member states are now preparing a letter to the EU. It is led by Belgium, and Spain has already signed, that will ask the EU to do exactly the same thing, to analyze the implications of the ICJ advisory opinion. It's maybe coming too late because it's almost a year, but they are recommending or asking the EU to have this analysis before the first anniversary of this advisory opinion. The final very specific thing I want to say, if the EU doesn't act, member states can act on themselves. And we now have an example of the Irish government, which is preparing legislation to ban trade with the Israeli settlements. And my question is, why is Ireland the only member state taking this approach? If Ireland can do it, why cannot Spain do it? Why cannot France do it? Why cannot all member states do it, given that all member states, at least on paper, agree that settlements are illegal and they undermine the very possibility of the two-state solution? And everybody is obviously concerned by the huge acceleration of the settlements and the drive towards annexation, including the announcement of 22 new settlements just at the end of May. So that would be maybe my final specific point that I'd like to highlight. This is something, if Ireland can do it, every member state can do it. Do not leave Ireland alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin Konechny. So poignant as always. I forgot to mention the brilliant article Mr. Konechny published earlier this month in The Guardian, very much touching up on these points which he has developed today. The EU faces a moment of truth. And also, indeed, I share that complete surprise every time I read about the continuation of commercial ties with the settlements and with companies in the settlements. It's surreal. It seems like the most obvious step. I think we are really running out over time. Really sorry, about 20 minutes over time. I'm really sorry for the next panel. Sven really wanted to make a point on the issue of sanctions. I wanted to, again, you've raised it, Martin, the question of specific sanctions, the points raised by that Financial Times article 2 weeks ago, most important on trade sanctions, travel sanctions, restrictions on business services and tourism in Israel would really drive the point home to Israel, as well as freezing foreign exchange reserves of Israel, which could be used to compensate Palestinians, which was also raised in that Financial Times article. But Sven, 30 seconds on the issue of unanimity in the question of sanctions, what's necessary, whether it's possible or too ambitious.
Sorry for taking the floor one more time, because I mean, Martin was brilliant in its expose. If the EU cannot work as a bloc, member states can. And I give you 6 points. And it's also for the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister Office very important. There are 6 points individual states can work on vis-à-vis Israeli settlers or enterprises doing business in illegal settlements. 6 points. So the first was mentioned, entry bans, visa restrictions was already covered. We have a legal basis for that under the Schengen Border Code. Restrictions on public procurement. We can prevent enterprises from actually participating in EU public procurement contracts, exclude companies. We have import bans on settlement goods. That's what the Irish government is trying to do. There is, of course, a caveat. It has to be compliant with our commercial policy and the EU prerogative to be that. But there are ways and means of dealing with that. Fourth, financial restrictions and divestment. Member states and public bodies can actually use directly public pension funds or state entities to divest from companies involved in settlements. This is a sovereign decision of Spain, Germany, France, Italy. You don't need the EU for that. Criminal prosecution under universal jurisdiction. You may have heard that in some countries, in Latin America, for instance, but also in other countries, Israeli soldiers who served in Gaza and took their selfies while bombing homes, etc., can actually be persecuted under the universal jurisdiction law. Member states have specific laws. Germany has the most far-reaching law where they can prosecute criminals or those accused of war crimes in their own country. For instance, Pinochet was prosecuted here in Spain, not in Chile. So universal jurisdiction is a very important and a very powerful measure. 6, labeling and consumer protection enforcement. Under the commercial policy of the EU, implementation under the commercial policy can be decided by qualified majority or individually by member states if certain conditions allow for doing so. For instance, you need to protect your consumers from basically having to face set products which breach human rights law, for instance, so which have regulations on food restrictions, etc., etc. So this is another possibility. So in sum, you have visa bans, procurement exclusions, divestment, universal jurisdiction, fraud, and consumer protection enforcement. These are measures individual member states can take. You don't need the EU for that. Sorry for taking the floor one more.
Thank you so much to our panelists, and give the floor back to Karim for our next panelist. Again, apologies to them for taking your time. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you to all of you who are still here. This is the second and final panel of this very timely roundtable that we have organized with Elcano. Thanks to Jose Bericat, who has been somehow the brainchild of this meeting. And we thought we would do this to divide the roundtable in the first, the view from Europe, and second, the view from Palestine. So we have Dr. Munir Nusseibeh. He's a professor of international law and director of the Human Rights Clinic at Al-Quds University. And he will be introduced by Noor Al-Qaoud from the Jerusalem Hispano-Palestinian Association.
Thank you. Buenos dias. Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for being here after 1 hour and a half. From la Asociación Hispano-Palestina de Jerusalén, it's our honor and our pride to be presenting today Dr. Munir Nusseibeh, and now you will understand why. Dr. Munir is a distinguished Palestinian human rights lawyer and an academic based in Al-Quds University in the capital of Palestine. By the way, for those of you who do not know Al-Quds, the word, it means Jerusalem. To be precise, Dr. Munir is a professor at Al-Quds University in the Faculty of Law and the director and co-founder of Al-Quds Human Rights Clinic, which is the first officially recognized clinical legal education program in the Arab world. But not only that. He's the director of the Community Action Center in Jerusalem, and allow me to elaborate a little bit more about this point later on. But before, I would like to introduce a little bit of his educational background. He holds a BA in law from Al-Quds University, a master's degree in international legal studies from Washington College of Law at the American University of Washington, D.C., but not only that. He's also a PhD from the University of Westminster in London. Now, going back to the previous point, I want to explain a little bit of what he does in the Human Rights Clinic. He trains law students to defend human rights under the Israeli occupation and supports the publication of in-depth reports, academic articles, and legal resources rooted in the fieldwork conducted by students and staff. Also, as a director of the Community Action Center, he oversees the delivery of free legal aid for Palestinians facing systematic violations in Jerusalem. He leads both domestic and international advocacy efforts to uphold international law in Palestine. Dr. Nusayba also leads several researches and service projects focused on forced displacement, international law, and the legal status of Jerusalem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noor. And also, we are very, very pleased to have Dr. Munir here, and also to have Dr. Sonia Boulos. She's an associate professor of international human rights law at the Faculty of Law and International Relations at the Antonio de Nebrija University here in Madrid. She holds a doctorate degree in juridical science from the University of Notre Dame in the United States. She was awarded the Fulbright doctoral scholarship for her doctoral studies, and her research focuses on the international protection of human rights. She's also the principal or main investigator of CEGERICO, the Research Group on Security, Risks Management and Conflict at Nebrija University. And she's also the co-editor of the Palestine-Israel Review, published by the Pennsylvania State University. And without further ado, we'll start with Sonia. Yes, please.
So, full disclosure, I'm Palestinian too. Before I start, I have two comments. You know, after 7 decades of colonization, I think Palestinians, you know, we tend to object and dissent all the time. It's the only way we can survive. So I have two comments in that spirit. One, I think the title should be not the catastrophic situation in Gaza, it should be the genocide in Gaza. It is only lamentable that after more than 19 months of live stream genocide that we still hesitate to call an event what it should be called. And the second one, that I'm the only one wearing a dress in this event. Anyways, thank you very much for inviting me. The thing is, I'm an international law professor, as Karim mentioned, so I'm going to repeat some of the things that have been said already, but I'm going to do that from an international law perspective and less from a European law perspective and a very strict law kind of, you know, emphasis. Because I don't have much time, I wrote my presentation, so I can say whatever I want to say, you know, on time. Okay, so in a 2011 publication celebrating 25 years of Spain's membership in the European integration project, Joaquín Almunia, a Spanish politician and former vice president of the European Commission, argued, what distinguishes the EU from other international organizations is the fact that the Union's most appealing asset is not economical, but rather it lies in its principles and values. No case challenges this assumption more than the ongoing genocide in Gaza. So I'm going to be focusing on 3 events to say how the EU utterly failed in responding adequately to major legal developments at the international level. So I'll start with the case, the genocide case brought by South Africa. I'll talk a bit about the arrest warrants, and finally on the advisory opinion. You have heard about these three events already, but as I said, I'm going to be more focusing on the legal aspect. So starting with the provisional measures in the case brought by South Africa. In its order on provisional measures, in the application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in Gaza, the ICJ declared that the risk of genocide was plausible and that there was a real imminent risk of irreparable harm to the rights of Palestinians protected under the Convention. The Genocide Convention, as it is called, focuses on prevention, not only on punishment. Prevention is a key element. In the Bosnian genocide case, the ICJ made it clear that the obligation to prevent genocide required states to employ the means at their disposal to prevent persons or group not directly under their authority from committing an act of genocide. The obligation to prevent arises at the instance that the state learns of or should have learned of the existence of a serious risk that genocide will be committed. In the South African case, the ICJ established that the risk of genocide is plausible and imminent. It put states on notice that supplying weapons to Israel could entail legal responsibility for failure to prevent genocide or even for complicity in genocide. Given the trade relations with Israel, the EU and key member states have, in the language of the court, the capacity to influence effectively the actions of Israel. They must take proactive measures to prevent genocide. But what did they do, or at least some of them? They continue to arm Israel, and they could be legally responsible for aiding and abetting the commission of a international crime. The EU itself is, pride itself of being a great supporter of the Armed Trade Treaty. Nobody talks about this treaty, which is very relevant, which was adopted in 2013. The treaty states a state party shall not authorize any transfer of weapons if it has knowledge at the time of authorization that the arms or items would be used in the commission of genocide and other international crimes. Since the adoption of the EU common position on arms exports, EU member states are legally bound to assess license applications for the export of arms. They must deny licenses whenever there is a clear risk that the export of military technology and equipment might be used in the commission of serious violation of international law, including genocide. Complicity in genocide entails two main elements. One, a state must provide aid or assistance to the genocide perpetrators, with the supportive act having substantially facilitated the genocide. This link can be established since the Israeli army uses military equipment provided by European states in the conduct of its military offensive in Gaza. Second, the assisting state must possess knowledge of the facts and an understanding of the perpetrator's specific intent. The ICJ's provisional measures indicating the plausibility of the commission of genocide by Israel and recent statement by various UN officials make it very clear that today no one can claim that accusing Israel of committing genocide lacks a legal basis. This is willful blindness. The EU's failure to take a clear stand or any action against its own members that continue to sell weapons to Israel is shameful. Moving to the arrest warrants. All ICC member states are obligated to cooperate fully with the International Criminal Court, including in executing arrest warrants of the court when the targeted individual is present in their territory, including airspace. Since all EU member states are members of the ICC, they have the obligation to arrest any individual sued by the court. Again, the EU prides itself of being a great supporter of the ICC. In 2011, the EU issued a council decision on the International Criminal Court, stating that the Union and its member states are determined to put an end to impunity of perpetrators of international crimes by taking measures at national level and by enhancing international cooperation to ensure their effective prosecution. Many seem to forget that in May 2006, the EU broke off talks with Serbia over stabilization and association agreement, citing Serbia's failure to arrest and surrender fugitives. to the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia. The European Commission made it clear that full cooperation was a precondition for resuming negotiations. The former prosecutor of the court, Carla Del Ponte, stressed that 90% of the indictees were brought to justice because, as a result of this conditionality, because the EU insisted. Arrest warrant obligations exist regardless of the individual official status. When the ICC fugitive Vladimir Putin visited Mongolia, an ICC member state, without being arrested, the ICC pre-trial chamber ruled that Mongolia violated its treaty obligations when it failed to arrest and surrender Putin, and therefore was made what is now known as finding non-cooperation. And what do we see in the case of arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant? Well, let's leave Orban on the side for 1 second. We have French, Italian, and German officials making public statements suggesting that Netanyahu, enjoys immunity and that they will not cooperate with the ICC. I'm not going to quote all their statements because I don't want to take your time. But, I'm allowed to be, outraged. And this is outrageous. It is an intentional misrepresentation of international law. It is an insult on our intelligence. What applies to Putin should apply to Netanyahu and Gallant. And finally, I want to talk about the advisory opinion. Well, in it, the International Court of Justice declared that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory is a wrongful act of a continuous character that entails international responsibility. It is illegal because it violates the right to self-determination of the Palestinians and because it violates the prohibition on the acquisition of territory by force. Now, I'm not going to read parts of what I prepared because you already know that about the obligations that in the operative part of the advisory opinion, the court kind of enumerated various measures that must be adopted by the state, but mainly they should not and could not recognize this illegal situation, help and assist, and also they have to distinguish always in their dealings between Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Now, I'm going to skip that and just going back to some point. The Court of Justice of the European Union made it clear in the case of Air Transport Association of America that under the Treaty of the European Union, the EU must contribute to the strict observance and development of international law. Consequently, when it adopts an act, it is bound to observe international law. Now, we hear a lot of talk about the EU-Israel Association Agreement. You know more or less by now what it does, this agreement, how it regulates relationship with Israel economically and also in terms of educational collaboration. And you heard a lot of speakers before me talking about, the human rights clause that could be used to suspend the agreement. But it's simply baffling to me that only now EU member states remember that this clause exists, given the historic, record of Israel in violating basic norms of international law. And now they think that they should review, what kind of measures could be taken. I don't want to be pessimistic, but as some of the, speakers before myself, made it clear that it's not what it seems. First of all, the EU agreement gives priority to the adoptions of measures which least disturb the functioning of the agreement. There was another case in the European Court of Justice from 2011. In it, the court said, it's called the Moghrabi case. In it, the court said that the fact that states can suspend the agreement doesn't mean they should, they have the obligation to, they can, but they're not under the obligation. But this analysis is no longer relevant or valid. We're talking about an advisory opinion of the highest international court saying that Israel is engaged in the violation of peremptory norm of international law. This is a completely different kind of analysis that we, should see. Now, all this talk about suspending, the agreement, I mean, it's an act of gaslighting. I don't have any other name for it. Suspending the agreement means that Israel would not benefit from preferential treatment. So it means we continue to have treatment with you, but it's not going to be preferential. Today, as also previous speakers highlighted, products coming from colonies in the West Bank, assuming they are labeled correctly, and this is a big if, they lose preferential treatment. The Court of Justice of the European Union had the opportunity to examine this specific issue in a case called the Firma Brita case. It's a company based in Germany that imported carbonated water coolers, accessories, and syrup manufactured by an Israeli supplier whose production site was in the West Bank. The European Court ruled that the customs authority of the importing state may refuse to grant preferential treatment provided under the association agreement if they suspect that the goods are coming from the West Bank. Back then, the decision was criticized, rightly, because it's only looked at the preferential treatment from the point of view of the association agreement, but it completely disregarded international law obligations on the European Union and its member states. So the only thing that the EU is doing now is like labeling products coming from colonies. And by doing this, it reduced its obligation not to recognize, aid, or assist to a question of consumer information, leaving it up to consumers to decide whether or not they want to buy this good. This cannot be justified anymore. This is a complete contradiction of what the International Court of Justice said. Just to compare, I'm just going to mention a few measures that were highlighted by a group of UN Special Procedures Mandate from September 2024. Look at the measures that they suggest. Banning goods, not putting a sticker. You don't put an end to a situation by putting a sticker on a product. Banning goods and services emerging from both the colonization of the occupied Palestinian territory and other unlawful activities that may be detrimental to the Palestinians' rights from entering their territory and markets. Canceling or suspending economic relations, trade agreements, and academic relations with Israel that may contribute to its unlawful presence and apartheid regime in the occupied Palestinian territories. Imposing sanctions, including asset freeze on Israeli individuals, entities, including businesses, corporations, and financial institutions involved in the unlawful occupation and apartheid regime, as well as on any foreign or domestic entities and individuals subject to their jurisdiction that supply goods and services that may aid, assist, or enable occupation and apartheid. So I have a final comment. Many today and other contexts are invoking Ukraine to argue that the EU is showing double standards. I think this framing is inadequate because actually it blurs the root cause of this double standard, and it is racism. It is the same racism that justified colonization and the plundering of the natural resources of almost entire continents and the subjugation of their peoples is the one that leads many governments today to treat Palestinian people, and I'm going to use the words of the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish, as a superfluous nation. It is the same racism that celebrates Israel's eliminatory settler colonial project as a project that made the desert bloom. I think enough is enough. It's about time that the EU recognizes its role in normalizing the oppression and the dehumanization of Palestinians and reverse its policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you today, and thank you, Sonia, also for all of your notes, which I will try not to repeat a lot of what you said, but maybe to also build on that. Maybe at the beginning, I want to say that I have had the pleasure to meet and work with Sven in Jerusalem, in Palestine. And I remember that twice we had events at Al-Quds University where I gave you a hard time. I was like interviewing him in an audience in a theater like this one, asking him hard questions about the double standards of the European Union. He was representing the European Union, obviously. So today I will be worse a little bit than your experience, because when we talked, it was even before the genocidal campaign. Maybe our psychological situation was a little bit calmer. Now, it's very difficult for us to even But it's not about you. It's still about the European Union and European policy. And the European policy towards Palestine has created a monster in our region. And this monster, and I will exactly start from where you ended, actually, comes from the whole framework that Europe deals with when it deals with, when it actually tackles the questions of Israel and Palestine and all of that. The first issue in the framework is that Israel is a normal state that is defending its security, defending itself. And this has two problems. First, that Israel is a normal state from the beginning. Why? Because Israel defines itself as a Jewish state, and the idea of a Jewish state means that there is Jewish supremacy. And this is not just an idea. This is defined within the constitutional law of Israel. Israel has a law of that Israel is a Jewish national state that says that only Jews have the right to self-determination in Israel. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a constitution in the modern world that gives right to self-determination to only one racial group, while they recognize that they have other racial groups, but they say only one racial group can enjoy this right to self-determination? That one of the objectives of Israel is to promote settling Jews. This is the constitution, huh? So first, it's not a normal state. And it's, the idea that it's an apartheid state, not only in the occupied Palestinian territory, but from the river to the sea, is a very important point that, of course, the Western world does not want to see, including the European Union. So first, the idea of that Israel is simply a normal state. No, it's not normal. It needs very deep dismantling of an apartheid regime that is not only effective in the occupied Palestinian territory, but also in areas where Israel assumes its sovereignty. The denial of the Palestinian refugees' right to return, which has been recognized internationally since 1948. Why do you think that is? Because of numbers. The number of Jews versus the number of Palestinians. If the numbers matter so much to the level of denying basic rights, this is a very fundamental problem from the very framework. Then it comes to the October 7th situation. What was the European Union and European countries, for that matter, opinion about what was happening? Israel has the right to defend itself. This has been already defeated. This argument has been already defeated by the International Court of Justice in 2004. 21 years ago, the International Court of Justice said Israel cannot invoke the right to self-defense while it is occupying the occupied Palestinian territory. So they cannot actually invoke this right against the Palestinian people, even if the Palestinian people or some parties in the Palestinian people use force. But let me ask you a question. Have you ever discussed with any European politician, in what way can Palestinians use force against Israelis? Is it legitimate? I think the European answer would be because all of the Palestinian parties are designated as terrorist organizations, the ones that use force, regardless of how they use force. Of course, don't take that I am saying that any use of force by Palestinians is legitimate. If a Palestinian use of force goes beyond the limits of IHL, that's a different story. However, from a framework point of view, why is Israel defending itself while it is colonizing Palestine, denying the right to self-determination as spelled out clearly by the International Court of Justice? How come Israel is defending itself in Palestine? And of course, I mean, even the more recent situation in Iran, Israel goes and attacks Iran, and then again, the representative of the European Union talks about right to self-defense. I don't understand how the equation works. But I'll go back to Palestine again. So this has encouraged, if you remember, after October 7th, for a long period of time, at the beginning, it was like the European Union, we support humanitarian aid. We should send humanitarian aid, but there was no call for ceasefire. Why? Because they wanted Israel to continue fighting. Then it was like, let's have humanitarian pauses. And this is like after the genocide was very clear. Huh? And then, these shy responses started developing until they reached a conclusion of, a ceasefire. But still, until today, the idea of self-defense is central in the EU policy when it comes to tackling the situation in Palestine. And this means that the European Union thinks that Israel should have a monopoly of force and power in areas where it assumes its sovereignty, as well as in the territory occupied since 1967. In what world is that normal? I don't know. And then when we talk about double standards, what about Ukraine? Suddenly, occupation is terrible. You're occupying the lands of the Ukrainians. And I know you said that it's not a good comparison, but still making it. Aggression, the crime of aggression is invoked, right? So you can see the huge gap. Of course, I don't expect anything else because it's a totally different relationship. Of course, a relationship between Europe and Israel, and Europe and Russia. So what is Europe missing in its discourse? It's missing to mention colonization, dispossession, recognition. The recognition of the Jewish state itself is a as a Jewish state is a huge problem that Europe needs to deal with. Apartheid. Every time we talk to diplomats and politicians, they don't want to use the term apartheid, despite how clear it is. Even now, the International Court of Justice, in its advisory opinion, said that Israel is violating Article 3 of CERD, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. Article 3 of CERD condemns two crimes, apartheid and racial segregation. So when you talk to a European now, he says, you know what, we don't know, it didn't say apartheid, so we cannot use apartheid. It's either apartheid or racial segregation. مظبوط? So they always are looking for technicalities to avoid the obvious. Even the idea that the occupation itself is illegal is still not getting the right reaction in the European Union. Where does the European Union, and actually for that matter, unfortunately, almost all the world find the comfort zone? There is a comfort zone that everybody is happy with. Two-state solution. Everybody is very comfortable to say, whether it is European Union, whether it is Senegal, or Arab countries, or the Arab League, or whatever it is, everybody, we support the two-state solution. And everybody feels that now they shouldn't feel guilty anymore. We support the two-state solution. So by supporting the two-state solution, we are supporting the Palestinians. Okay, how do you support the two-state solution? What are the measures that you are taking towards the support of the two-state solution? This is where we always stop. It's just rhetoric that we support, but in what way? It's a comfort zone for everyone. The other thing is that Israel is always seen as an ally by Europe. This is something that is also central in the European view. Israel is a democracy. Israel is an ally. Even when you hear about, and based on that, the wall of impunity that has been constructed around Israel over the past decades, Europe has played an important role in it. A lot of, whether we are talking about like General Assembly, resolutions, what the conditions that the Europeans impose in order to vote yes, always the conditions are no practical measures. If you want us to condemn, settlements, yeah, we will condemn settlements. We have condemned them before. This is our policy. Settlements are bad. Be happy. But if you want us to take measures, we will vote no. That's always the European position. So while you have the global South always like pushing for measures, even though not the whole global South is taking measures, but pushing for measures, you always have the European Union saying, we're happy to give you language, not all the language, not apartheid, but settlements and like there's certain things, but we're not happy to take measures or to support any measures. So any discussions within the General Assembly, and I'm involved in advocacy, so I meet diplomats in New York and in Brussels and in different places, and I can see that this is a dynamic basically in different places. But look at this also. Even when the Europeans are thinking about taking measures, are dreaming in their wildest dreams about taking measures against Israel, these measures are against the settlements and the settlement products. And like it's about distinguishing between something called Israel proper, which I don't know what that means, and settlements. First, this distinction is impossible to make, almost impossible to make. But second, the settlements are planted and supported and nurtured by Israel. They are not independent entities that you can punish on their own. It's Israel that is creating this regime and benefiting from this regime. And you cannot make this distinction between Israel and the settlements. I'm prohibiting settlements products. But if the same company also has another company, another factory in Al-Naqab, then we'll buy that product. Just label it for us. So, of course, sanctions against Russia, are they against the Russian soldiers who are in Ukraine or against Russia? They're against Russia, right? But it's clear. I mean, when it's with Russia, it's very clear that we are, there is a state, it has violated international law, hence we will have to take measures against the state. But with Israel, we are always careful. We have to, do it like this, the sanctions, So this has helped with the impunity. It continued. But even with the judicial initiatives, we have always, for example, the ICC file, individual European countries like Germany, for example, or the UK have worked so hard to push back in the ICC against any Israeli prosecutions. But now I want to talk about some positive things happening. Okay, some of them are happening in Europe, some of them are happening outside Europe. In Europe, we have a lot of cases within the European domestic legal system that are challenging the situation. For example, a number of organizations in the Netherlands have won cases against the government in order to prevent the government's involvement in providing parts for the F-35 jets into Israel. They won in the courts, right? So law worked in that case. There are currently discussions, even in countries like Ireland, which is the only country now that is authorizing selling Israeli bonds in the European Union altogether. There are discussions in Ireland, in the Irish Parliament even, about stopping that. Of course, still it's a political issue, quite controversial. in Ireland, but probably eventually things like that will work. I think law will slowly, unfortunately, of course, slowly, and it's very bad that I'm saying slowly because every day we are losing dozens of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, and Gaza is being destroyed further, and totally this. But slowly there are changes happening that we should focus on, so we shouldn't lose hope. Another thing that I think is very significant, in addition to all the cases that all the colleagues have presented before, Nicaragua versus Germany. This is a case that is not getting a lot of coverage in media so far. I think it will in the future, because there was one day when they applied for provisional measures at the International Court of Justice, and the International Court of Justice rejected the provisional measures. But let me tell you about the case. Nicaragua is arguing that Germany is violating international law by aiding and abetting in Israeli genocide, but not only genocide, because as you mentioned earlier, genocide will be still determined, in a few years from now. But genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, international humanitarian law violations, so a wide scope of laws that Germany is helping Israel with. So it's actually also a revolutionary case because it looks at third state responsibility. It doesn't go to the court for Israel, it went for Germany. I think it's genius, actually, from the legal point of view, especially if it wins, if the case actually wins in the court. If the case wins, and that's something that we will be watching over the next few years, if that case wins, the court will decide the following, because, if it wins, the court will say the following. Germany has violated this and this and this obligation. Germany has to stop supporting Israel in this and this and this. Germany has to provide guarantees of non-repetition, because that's what the court usually does. And finally, has to provide reparations. So Germany probably will have to pay from its pocket to repair the damages that stemmed from its arming Israel. This is great. And this is the way international law should work. I hope that it will work like that. But it's also an important message for every country around the world that please reform yourself internally before it gets into different courts. Of course, it's not likely that every country will be facing courts, but at the same time, there is a very powerful struggle against the different war crimes that are happening, whether it is local, social, grassroots, human rights organizations, that the tide is changing at the end of the day. How many Palestinians we will lose, how many lives, how many people among us will be tortured until the moment when the world, including Europe, will wake up and do what they are supposed to do is something, unfortunately, that I don't know, but it is very clear that it's changing. So I'll stop here. Palestinian view of how Europe. Thank you very much again, and sorry if I bothered you.
Thank you very much, Munir. And originally this roundtable pretty much focused on the situation in Gaza, and we then, because of what has developed with the Iranian crisis or with the Israeli attack on Iran, we have had to include it also because it's really part of what's happening today and current affairs, and we at Casa Árabe are very concerned by these further developments. We are very aware that the view or the focus has been shifted from the genocide happening in Gaza to the attack in Iran. So obviously these are terrific moments. We are very much concerned, and we try to analyze this and to take some perspective to try and see what are the exits, what are the other connections as well regarding the other Arab countries. The collaboration with Elcano is essential to feed what are precisely what this kind of analysis might produce, might help our policymakers as well to try and figure out ways forward. And I just wanted to maybe pick up some couple of things you mentioned. The role of the Global South. I think it's key to move things forward, because you have more than mentioned throughout the morning the double standards, the rhetoric that has allowed for impunity on behalf of Israel, and the fact that the two-stage solution is very much a mantra that is more and more becomes more of an empty shell without a proper roadmap and without specific measures to try and figure out how to make this happen. In any case, we don't have time for questions, because this is how we had designed the program, and we had to fit everything in this morning, and we are already a bit past our time. What I wanted to say that this has been streaming, so thanks to everyone who has been joining also the streaming session, and that Casa Árabe and Elcano Royal Institute will continue cooperating. If you want to check this session again, it's going to be online on our YouTube channel, at Casa Árabe's YouTube channel. Thanks very much for the first panel, for Sven, Jose, and Martin, who was joining us also from Brussels, for obviously Josep Borrell and the two directors, Charles Powell and our Director General, Miguel Moro Aguilar. Just a quick mention for those of you who are following the Palestine and the very, very alarming situation developing. Next week, not at Casa Árabe, unfortunately, but this is not important. Francesca Albanese will be in Madrid, and Munir will be with her as well on Tuesday at the Círculo de Bellas Artes. I think it's at 7 or 7:30. So check it out. Make sure you get a place, and make sure that you keep on talking about what's going on in Palestine. So thank you very much. Shukran jazilan, and see you soon. And muchas gracias.